But what am I about to show you? I'm going to talk about fluency. And a long time ago, when I started talking about fluency in general, so back around 2015, 2016, when I started doing some presentations on fluency, one of the things that I would ask is I would ask people to go into small groups, or in this case, maybe a breakout room. Won't do it today, though. Groups of 3 or 4 or so, and ask them, in your mind, before I get into the definition that I'm going to present to you, what is fluency to you? How do you define fluency? If one of your students asked you, Mr. Cruz, I want to be fluent, but what is fluency exactly? How would you answer them? What would you say? Well, fluency means this, you can do this, you can do that, or it isn't this, or it isn't that. And I would put people into these groups, pardon me, and after maybe a couple of minutes, I'd have to ask them to report their discussion results. And you would get a few different things that people would say, but one of the things that they would say is that, well, fluency is the ability to speak well, or they would use other words, to speak eloquently. Or one thing that seemed to be strangely common was there were people who would say, well, fluency is the ability to speak with complexity, accuracy, and fluency. I kid you not, they would say that fluency is made up of complexity, accuracy, and fluency, which of course is, as you can tell by Annika's face, completely tautological. You do not define a word by using the word itself. You go around in circles. But people were kind of caught up with the idea that you had to have all of these skills before you actually became fluent. And I would answer when I had time, sometimes I didn't, but I wanted to get people to think, okay, well, when you look at, let's say, a 3-year-old child, a 4-year-old child in their native language, in their native environment, and when I say native, I mean, I'm not big on that word, but in their first language environment, would you say that they're fluent? Because most kids start being able to speak at around 2 years old. They start being able to blather on at around 3 years old. And by 4 years old, 5 years old, they're having full-on conversations with their friends and their family. Now, would you say that they're fluent? And people would say, well, yeah, I guess so. But would you say that they speak with complexity? Well, no, not really. They don't have the same vocabulary that I do. Well, how about accuracy? How's their grammar? Do they make mistakes in grammar? Well, no, they still make mistakes in grammar. So how is it that these children who barely know how to hold a crayon and probably don't know very quickly the difference between a G and a Q and a P and a B and a D on sight, okay, some might, how did they get to the point where you could look at them and say, well, that's a fluent 4-year-old child? And what do they do that our students don't do, even though they, at least in Japan, have studied English at least since junior high school, first grade. So 3 years of junior high school English, 3 years of high school English, so minimum 6 years of high school education. What can those 4-year-old children, first language speakers, do that our students can't? And it made me want to research the topic. And that's where I started getting more information about how the literature and how academics actually talks about fluency. And it made one of the first things that I looked for was what is the definition of fluency? Where is there any kind of a mechanical definition of where you're fluent and I'm not? For example, yesterday I was working with my good friend Adam Jenkins, and we wanted to make a video in Japanese to do some PR work for an event that we're working on. And he obviously spoke Japanese better than I did. And how would you say his fluency is higher than mine? And those were the questions that I was asking when I started looking at the Sefer. And for most of you, as you know, that the Sefer has 6 levels, and they start from A1, A2, B1, B2, C1, C2, C2 being the highest and A1 being the lowest. A1 to B1 have no mention of fluency. They have some targets. You know, you can say your own name. You can ask for locations of destinations, like where is the bathroom, that sort of thing at that level. But fluency as an issue is not mentioned until you get to B2, and I've got it highlighted there in yellow. And you've got these long descriptions of what you should be able to do if you're a B2 level speaker, but in terms of fluency, it says you just have a degree of fluency. And when you move to C1, the definition is you can express ideas fluently. So generally, you get an idea that, well, somebody has some fluency, but a C1 speaker speaks fluently. C2 is very fluently. So you go from a little bit fluent, very fluent. You have all of these very exacting definitions in the rest of B2, C1, and C2. So that makes it very easy to tell your students, well, can you understand almost everything that you hear very quickly? Can you understand a wide range of demanding, longer clauses, recognize implicit meaning? Then you're a C1. But when it comes to fluency, it's all very, very vague. So when we're talking to kids about fluency and they're asking, well, Mr. Cruz, am I a C1 or a B2 or a C2? All you can do is just say, well, I kind of think you're a C1. It's a matter of feeling, not really that scientific. So I started asking myself, well, where do we go from there? And I asked myself again that question about those children who are 4 years old. Complexity is not the thing. Your ability to speak with really high-level grammar, we know kids who have high-level grammar, we've seen them take tests and they can do really, really well on a test, but they can't speak. So it's not necessarily complexity or your knowledge of complexity or your ability to actually use complexity in a conversation, because even if you can speak with complex sentences, that doesn't mean that you're fluent. For example, a relative clause such as the one I'm about to use now, spoken this way, obviates the fact that whoever that was wasn't fluent. So I look at that, and then I look at complexity and fluency, and those things should be separated. And fluency itself can be defined just by these two things. Can you speak quickly, and can you speak smoothly? Just those two things. Whether you speak with a lot of vocabulary or really difficult grammar, not really that important. Because this is the definition of a 4-year-old child speaking. They speak quickly, and they speak smoothly. And that's what our kids can't do. What does that mean in terms of speed? You speed in your speaking, the speed in your responses, and the speed in your idea creation. So your ability to speak is important. So if you can actually patter off like this, that's really important. But then somebody asks you a question like, do you like ice cream? And it takes you that long to come up with, yes, I love ice cream. Yeah, you can say it really quickly, but it takes too long for you to actually come up with a response or to come up with new ideas in case the conversation topic changes. Then your fluency is missing a few important aspects in terms of speed. Smoothness. Can you control the pace between your words and sentences so you're not dealing with staccato bursts, with long pauses, or you're able to actually control so that then when you want to speak slowly and maybe have a dramatic pause, you can. But if you really want to speak quickly, then you can actually do that too, to a degree. I mean, all of us are professional speakers. We're instructors, so we know how to do dramatic pauses. We know how to raise our voices and raise our speaking speed so that then that's effective. You don't need that in a normal conversationalist, but that degree of control is important because that's what lends you to be able to speak much more smoothly. There's a definition of speed. Now, I would like to emphasize that from here, these definitions are my own. They are hypothetical. They are not scientific. They are not based on data. I do not have the grant money, the budget money to actually be able to do get a whole bunch of thumb counters and count these students as they go. But my hypothesis is based on science that's been done before by linguists who've actually done the thumb counting. And when you're talking about mean length runs, so I actually measured disfluencies and repetitions and micro disfluencies and things like that. I came up with the idea that if you can speak to about 110, 120 words per minute, you have hit minimal level fluency. So you're no longer someone who struggles with words. You are talking something like at this pace, which is a little bit slow, but believe it or not, this is about 2 words per second. You still pause between your sentences, and sometimes you forget a word, but generally you can speak like this. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't have a lot of students that can keep that up, even if it is just 2 words per second, because the idea of a minimal 110, 120 words per minute requires you to actually be able to keep it up over time. So it's not like you just memorized a couple of sentences for a speech. Of course, that doesn't count. It has to be a spontaneous speech, a 4 or 5 minute monologue, not a speech, sorry. It has to be a spontaneous monologue. So if I ask you, hey, tell me what you had for dinner yesterday. Okay, did you cook it? You didn't cook it? And try to get them to speak and see if they can speak for 5 minutes at that pace or maintain a 10-minute conversation at that pace, then they're hitting the target that you want to have. Us as expert level speakers are generally somewhere between 130 to 180 words per minute. The slowest of us, according to the research that I've done, is at about 130 words per minute. And that is what I would call almost annoyingly slow speakers. And 180 words per minute, that's actually me when I'm a little bit excited or I've had a little too much coffee. And those 130 words per minute, when I listen to that, I think, okay, I know you're a Canadian, I know you're an American, but I measure you out consistently at 130 words per minute. If anyone speaks any slower than that, I would think that there's something wrong, or they really are second language learners. And if those second language learners fall below 100 words per minute, 110 words per minute, they're probably talking a little bit like this to you. That doesn't hit my definition of fluency for a couple of reasons. One, they're speaking too slowly, their words per minute is too slow, and they're not speaking smoothly. How do you measure smoothness? Well, there's a thing that linguists and linguistics professors use to measure that. It's called the mean length run. Now, I got to explain that to you. It's a technical term. The idea is that when you're measuring somebody's speaking, you put them through a 5-minute monologue, you put them through a 10-minute conversation, and you count the number of words that they can start from to the end until they hit a disfluency, when they say something like, you know, or they repeat, so a micro repeat like that, or they repeat an entire sentence, or they come back to, or sometimes they do Trumpian things. You know, many people say that I don't really speak English very well. So those are disfluencies. Trump speaks with a ton of disfluencies. He probably would barely come up to well, he's known to speak at a 4th grade level. His mean length runs are probably much shorter than someone who speaks very eloquently. Normally, mean length runs are measured in syllables. They want the linguists who measure this, measure them down to the tiniest amount that they can. But syllables are something that's very hard to sell to students. So I measure it out in words. If you can speak somewhere between 30 to 40 syllables, or actually 28 to 35 syllables, then that means that you're achieving approximately the mean length run that you need to start being considered fluently. 25 to 35 syllables is approximately 8 words. So I don't know about you, but I very rarely get students coming up to me at the end of the class saying, Mr. Cruz, is my homework due on Thursday? That's 8 words. Mr. Cruz, is my homework due on Thursday? Hardly ever get that because I don't have a lot of fluent students. That speed that I just spoke at was probably about 125, 130 words per minute, and the mean length run stretched out over 8 words, none of them being very difficult words like immediately or expensive, you know, multi-syllable words, mostly 2 or 3 syllable words like that.